Well, let's get more on this now. We're joined by Sahar Aziz, Professor of Law at Texas A&M School of Law and a specialist on Egypt. Her most recent paper is Rethinking Counterterrorism in the Age of ISIS, Lessons from Sinai. She's joining us live from Dallas. Ms. Aziz, always good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. So given the recent attacks on Egyptian Christians, today was just the latest. There was the bombing at Cairo's largest Coptic cathedral, killing at least 25 people in December. How much of a security lapse is this by the Egyptian government?
Well, it's more of an intelligence lapse than a security lapse. The Alexandria church appears to have had 2 or 3 police officers and possibly more guarding it. And in fact, they were killed because they did not allow the suicide bomber inside the church. So they have started to change the security outside the churches. And in fact, I was in Egypt in December and noticed an increase in security. The problem is an intelligence failure. In other words, the state did not know in advance that this was being planned. And that means that they need to work on their intelligence gathering to stop these types of attacks before they happen, because it's very difficult to stop a suicide bomber if you don't know in advance and try to prevent the attack from occurring.
Will a state of emergency do anything to improve their intelligence gathering, because they've stepped up security measures after this attack? That will surely be welcomed by communities that have been targeted in attacks, but there's also the state of emergency that has in the past waived constitutional rights and protections. Is this a necessary, is it a positive step for Egypt?
Well, Egypt has a very checkered history with the emergency law. As some may know, it was in place for almost 30 years under Mubarak. And so there is some concern, and it's a valid concern, that the 3 months after these horrific attacks could ultimately turn into a permanent state of emergency. And that often has vast implications against anyone who's deemed to be the opposition. And so it's used as pretext under the guise of national security in order to try people in military courts or state security courts with minimal due process rights. So that is usually something that is too late. The intelligence is something that you gather in advance and is often as a result of cooperating with communities and not alienating them. And the problem is that the Egyptian government has lumped anyone who's a political Islamist, whether you're Muslim Brotherhood, whether you're Salafi, whether you're ISIS, or whether you're just a religious devout Muslim, as a threat to the state. And that is not assisting them in their intelligence gathering. So they need to be more nuanced for the sake of security in Egypt, and particularly at this point in time for Coptics in Egypt.
Do you see this current Egyptian government being more nuanced, especially in the face of the kinds of attacks that we've seen in Egypt, not just on the Coptic Christian community, but also the attacks in the Sinai over the past few years under this current government?
Well, the response in Sinai has certainly been a scorched earth response. And that is one of the reasons why it has not gotten any better, and the soldiers are still targeted and being killed, so are civilians, and so are ISIS fighters. So there is certainly a conflict raging in Sinai. Unfortunately, there is very little media coverage because there's a blackout, so it's unknown to the average Egyptian as well as to the world. And so when we see ISIS starting to target mainland Egyptian targets, soft targets, civilian targets, that is usually a sign that the Egyptian military is not successfully fighting the terrorist threat in Sinai, and they need to come up with a more development-based approach that isn't simply scorched earth using the military and killing and asking questions later, where oftentimes innocent civilians are killed, and then they often cause radicalization among people who otherwise would not have joined ISIS.
Professor Sahar Aziz, joining us from Dallas, Texas there. Thank you as always for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you.